Ian, have you ever paid 30% tax on electricity before?
Not yet. Oh, if Biden has his way, I'm sure he'd be able to manage to pull it off, but I doubt it very much. I mean, what a ridiculous conception of an idea. How can you tell the difference between what you've got plugged in, what and what's a Bitcoin miner and what's a refrigerator, for example? It's nuts. It's nuts. I can't wrap my head around why or how they think they can suggest such an idea, to be honest.
I was writing an article earlier this morning about this very topic, sort of breaking the whole thing down. And I've spent a couple of hours reading through it all and sort of gathering different informations. And one paper actually explained it's not impossible to determine what energy is being used for. Obviously, like if you know in that certain area or postcode there's a mining rig and like there's a request for a lot of energy, concentrated energy sending there, you could assume that that's being used to mine Bitcoin, but it could just as well be a data center from the CIA, NSA, or whoever in government in a remote area in like Colorado or whatever. So it'd be funny as hell if they like implement this tax and then they actually shut down their own data centers. Imagine that.
Yeah, all Bitcoin miners should now migrate to where all these data centers are for the CIA and just like plug into the
Right
same
next to
network and say, so who are you going to cut out then? It's true. I mean, it's such hypocrisy because it's okay for these data centers to, be plugged into the energy grid and all that sort of stuff. But as soon as you call it a Bitcoin mine, that's something different. And it all boils down to me to the fact that it's one of the same thing, a data center versus a Bitcoin miner, same kind of concept. But the reason why they don't want a Bitcoin miner is because it's giving us peasants, as you mentioned off air, us plebs, the power. We're taking the power away from them, and they don't want that, and they can see that happening. So they're trying every single avenue they can think of and conceptualize to try to come for for Bitcoin, and it's just not going to work. They're just going to try and exhaust all the avenues they can, is my opinion. And where it goes, I don't know, but and how what attack vector they're going to use next. But currently, the hot topic at the moment is energy. This proposed up to 30% tax that Biden's administration is suggesting for Bitcoin mining, and yeah, do you know what? I've tried to really wrap my head around it ever since it was put out a couple of weeks ago now. Was it a week ago? This news?
10 days ago? Yeah, something like this.
Yeah, and I've listened to all different Twitter spaces and podcasts about it, and I just can't understand how they can ever really enforce this.
It's the enforcement is one thing for me, and then my mind immediately goes, right, so it's like you said, hypocrisy. On the one hand, on the same grid, you could maybe have a totally renewable energy system, and you could have a let's call it a wasteful energy system. And one could be used to store funny cat videos on YouTube, and the other one, with like the bad energy and the good energy, could be used, for example, to mine Bitcoin via hydro, via wind, solar, whatever it might be. But then, because the good energy goes to Bitcoin, they have to pay a 30% tax, although the bad energy is still used with fossil fuels to store videos on the internet. And that's when my mind goes, right, okay, if like the idea behind it is to get more money in and to sort of punish the industry this way, fine. But then surely you would have to potentially make a tax on the whole internet, I guess, because after all, everything's been run on servers, and you need ACs to cool all of these servers, which is also another energy waste thing. So surely there is a direct attack on it, and it's a funny coincidence that at the same time that this thing is being proposed, you saw the World Economic Forum write about actually positive effects from Bitcoin, from the mining industry in data centers. They didn't call it the positive effects with Bitcoin mining.
Right.
So looking at it and not coming to a conclusion that it has to be some form of attack vector is very strange to me.
Yeah, and you mentioned a good point about the type of energy. So you've got renewables and other energy that would otherwise be wasted. And obviously the difference between the two of those is renewables being like resources such as hydro and solar, right? And the wasteful stuff is the byproduct of producing electricity that you're trying to make use of and put it into mining that way. And I keep coming back to our episode that we had a few weeks ago, talking about Bitcoin mining in Iceland and remote parts of the world. And at the end of the day, if this is implemented, all it would do is encourage miners to just go out of the US and find other places in the world where they're going to be able to do the same for cheaper, and always be incentivized to find the cheapest source of electricity. And obviously the best sources of electricity are going to be making use of energy that is otherwise wasted, or renewables, because obviously the incentives behind producing the Bitcoin and the amount of energy that is needed to produce these Bitcoins. And all they're doing really is shooting themselves in the foot. And moving the talent and this new innovative movement elsewhere, and they're going to live to regret it, I think.
Completely. And I've spent the last few weeks, so I was a bit more quiet on like social media and stuff, just because I have more work to do. It's funny how suddenly everyone wants you to write about bank failures and national debt and big countries going to default on their debts and all of these things. So I spend a bit more time in that region of my working field, but I also spend a lot of time speaking to, I wouldn't call it underground miners, but people you would never expect to use some form of their infrastructure, whether that be a farmer, whether that be a data center actually, to mine. And funnily enough, I've seen more of that power shift coming towards Europe. And I don't know if it's a coincidence again that we got like MiCA, which is the regulation proposal, the framework by the European Union, and it's actually not as bad as we expected it, to be honest. There's a big portion in there with like the KYC and surveillance and stuff, but that's not really in the MiCA framework. It's in like a different framework that's being blended in. And it just makes me wonder if for the first time in a long time, we see Europe waking up to the realization, hey, instead of like hating on each other and sort of the French hating the English and the English hating the French and the Germans being stuck somewhere in the middle as well, that they realized, oh, we actually have a lot of resources, a lot of different tools to sort of counteract with like the big bullies that are the USA. Speaking from an economical, financial standpoint. And it somehow shows in this reaction as well. So instead of coming up with a framework to say, hey, we want to keep you inbound, but there has to be some form of leverage, or you have to somehow meet us in the middle and come up with ideas, the SEC is sort of going dark. No one's really hearing from them. Some shitcoin companies are suing them. And then you come up with these tax, and it's sort of the thing like, haha, we did something, it's horrible. I don't see how it's going to get approved and implemented correctly. Like, approving and implementing is a different thing. And then you sort of move on and completely moving all of that innovation away. I can't see how this is going to benefit them unless something drastic changes. Or it's being used as a weapon of some sorts to divide society a bit more. It really feels a bit, this way, and it's just the strange times we live in, I guess, where whatever your beliefs are, your stuff you're saying online, or causes you commit yourself to, that it sort of splits society a bit more further apart. It's a weird ramble from me, but it sort of feels this way, that Europe is catching up, realizing that if we unite, it gets good, and the US is just continuing hammering down and splitting the country up even more.
It's kind of, I'm thinking, could it be almost like a desperate attempt at trying to gain some kind of control over Bitcoin indirectly. And what I mean by that is they are, and I'm talking about they being the US, because, this is the proposal about the 30% tax coming from the US. Do they just not understand? Are they unwilling to change so much that all they now see is a money-making opportunity? So the only way that they can really try to get some of the profits from Bitcoin mining is by taxing them in fiat. And they're just trying to recoup as much fiat money back into their system as possible, and indirectly sucking those profits out of Bitcoin as a way to try to maximize their balance sheets.
If they
Rather
do
than it being an attack vector, they're just trying to get as much money from it as possible.
I get where you're going, because it runs out. Yellen said it. If they don't run in with cash anymore, they're going to default. If this really is the case, so I think it's unlikely in 2 points. Bitcoin is still very small compared to other asset groups. So even though I put out a hilarious meme today saying gold is like 10 times bigger and it has no merchant adoption, it's still small in that comparison. But obviously it's gotten the potential to expand hugely and go into supersonic mass adoption. And I think that's probably what they fear more. But if that really is the case, that's like a soft attack on Bitcoin, doesn't it only solve their problems in the short term? And what I mean by that is,
it does, yeah.
Let's imagine they cash out all of that at 30K. And then just as Bitcoin has always had with like the halving and all of these things, it goes up again in fiat terms. That's like a loss on their book if it surpasses the 30K. Every cent after those 30K is potentially something they could have gotten out more. And it just feeds Bitcoin back into the market, because it's not like they take in the Bitcoin and burn it like other cryptocurrencies where you can burn it. There's always an even exchange. So in the short time, yes, you could say if they buy a big portion, they short it, price goes down in fiat terms. But in the long run, someone will swoop that Bitcoin up again, and sort of via open market principles, the thing stays alive and it just keeps on floating, I guess. So and you kind of also see this with these BRC20 token thingies. The mempool cooled down again, fees are not that more expensive, and Bitcoin continued to do what it's supposed to do. And the big profiters in that thing were the miners, because for the first time in a long time, they've gotten a lot out of it. So again, it's inevitable. All things lead down the Bitcoin road. And if anything, I think it continues helps us in the long run. And it really feels like they don't have a lot of stuff left over in their tanks, or they don't know what they're doing. And I would just put it on incapability by these officials and not really thinking long term in the end. It's sort of they have holes in their things, and they're trying to patch up everything very quickly. And at one point, that patch will become wet again, and it will break essentially. So it's sort of
so I suppose they're just trying to make it a little bit unattractive for any new potential miners in this new movement. And maybe they're just trying to sort of create a smoke screen and slow the adoption, keep the profits low as they can, for as long as they can.
But I always compare it to, we both living in the UK, to these weird times in the, was it late 80s, early 90s, where you had an influx of regulation coming in after Thatcher. That must have been the 90s.
80s in the Thatcher.
Yeah, but after her, she ended up 89, did she? It must be early 90s. The dude with the big glasses coming after her. I forgot his name.
John Major.
Major, exactly.
John Major, yeah. Let's go back to basics or something, he said.
Yeah, exactly. And sort of the deregulation that took place under Thatcher sort of crept its way in, and it's a lot of like the foundation we see these days. So what happened? If too much regulation came in too quickly for certain industries, they just changed their location essentially. And what opened up, there is these things called the Cayman Islands, and the UK and these islands, they have, deals with each other. And if you have like your business there and a small portion there, you get like tax benefits and whatever it is. So I see a very similar move by the mining industry. I don't think they will potentially ever leave the US completely, because I think there's just too much time and resources invested into this. But who knows? You might be seeing states like Montana, for example, who sort of become a pro-mining hotspot.
Right.
I still see Texas being one of these things. And then you just get the states like North Carolina who want to ban it completely, for example. So you get these weird things, and I think that's just the way it's going to head in now. Obviously, because it's Bitcoin, it tends to be a bit slower than other things, so that's possibly an advantage. And it sort of feels like this is the flow and the way we are heading down to. Nevertheless, the tax doesn't make any sense. Because
It makes zero sense.
Are we going to ban or tax video games now? Because they spend the same amount of electricity. Like, come on.
I know. And what does that mean when I'm playing my Bitcoin games earning sats? Do I have to pay 30% tax on that now as well?
Good point.
It's almost like, I don't know, maybe another way of looking at it is, are they trying to sort of polarize and divide opinion about Bitcoin? Badmouth it as much as possible, make it seem like it's a horrible, dirty, polluting technology, and some people are going to believe that, and some people are obviously going to buy into it. And this is what central authorities and governments have always done. They've attempted to keep us in our little pigeonholes and polarize us, so we're fighting amongst each other rather than actually focusing on what really matters, and that is our own autonomy and our own way of living in this world. We just got to do as we're told, get out there, work as hard as you can. And you've got newspapers over here in the UK, you've got the tabloids like the Daily Mirror and the Sun, and the Daily Mirror is more aligned to the Labour Party, which is a more kind of
Wait, what?
liberal. Yeah,
Daily
and
Mirror Mirror, yeah, sorry.
Daily Mirror, and then the Sun is more kind of a conservative paper. They're both tabloids, they're both full of shit and nonsense and sensationalist headlines and things like that. But you get people that buy these newspapers day in, day out, because it feeds into the narrative that they feel that they subscribe to. And then when you've got the politicians sort of repeating the sort of stuff that these people are reading in the news, it just ingrains in them, in their mindset, that their way of thinking is right and that the other people over there are wrong. And they're trying to keep us divided, where we've got actually more in common than we probably realize. And I've only started to realize that under Bitcoin, more time I'm spending in Bitcoin and hearing people's different views, opinions, the way we should live, etc. I'm like, okay, you will probably be more right than what I would identify as being more left, but I see your point of view and I kind of agree with it. There's just a couple of little things I don't agree with, but we've got more in common than I first realized we did. And maybe there's a part of this with Bitcoin where we all understand Bitcoin, we all get Bitcoin and agree of what it can achieve in to some extent, and that I'm finding that I'm making friends with people I would have never made friends with before because of their views, and it's making me realize that actually there is more common ground that we can find together and on our own without the red or blue party telling us which way we should be heading. Because it doesn't make a difference at the end of the day. It doesn't matter who's in power or who is behind the box in the Houses of Parliament or wherever. It's all the same shit. Nothing can really ever change because the money is fucking broken.
It's the money. Really, I resonate a lot with what you said there. The great thing about Bitcoin is it unites. And it's not only the uniting thing, it's also a great sort of a filter lift, I call it. Like I had the discussion last Thursday at this meetup we've had in London. And one guy was like, I've been brought up by my parents. They were both, I think, of Asian descent. And we always were quite of a woke family. And I was like, okay, I'll let him speak now. Because I don't think he's woke in the sense, like, if you read it in like the mainstream and all of these things currently. I think he just meant sensible, meaning he brought up an example with his grandma and his mom, and they won legal suits against institutions back in the 70s and stuff. And I think most common people can agree that it doesn't matter what your gender is, we should all have equal rights at the end of the day. And to me, that is sensible. That has nothing to do with like being woke or left or right or whatever. And I let him speak, and then at the end I told him like, but dude, what's the difference now between calling it woke and sensible? If you compare it to like the Bitcoin thing, we've got our issuance schedule and everyone plays by these rules, or you've got the halving on whatever. Everyone knows it, and there's no need to like change the narrative around these things. You can maybe play around a bit and say like, oh, if you're a trader, for example, halving is amazing because like price explodes.
Right.
And if you're like a miner, you like ordinals, whatever, because the mining fees go up. But still, the common thing is that these rules are given and we all play by them. And when I said that, he went like, holy shit, I know what you mean now by calling it sensible and not woke. And then we talked about so many different things. And just on paper, he and I had very different backgrounds. Like he had he has a stable job. He's employed. Like I'm a freelancer, and I'm sort of dabbling around my places. And he obviously has Asian descent. That I was brought up in Central Europe. So all of these things, if you would have looked at it through the party dividing glasses, we should have never spoken that evening, but at the end of the day it was a very pleasant conversation, and we just sat there because we both were interested in Bitcoin. And I think that's the, in my opinion, hidden power that Bitcoin brings to the table. I wish a lot of people would realize this sooner, but again, everyone has his time and journey into the Bitcoin rabbit hole, and it does take a while, I think, to get to that conclusion.
Wokeism has become a bit of a loaded word, and it's used very loosely, I think. It's a bit of a cop-out term. It's a bit of a cop-out term. It's like, oh, it's just woke. If you want to have the conversation, let's have the conversation about what you mean by that. Is it because you don't agree with something or the way people want to live, or you don't subscribe to an ideology? Let's just have that chat. Don't just say, oh, that's just woke, and then just write it off. For me, wokeism is similar to progressivism, in the sense that, look, let everyone kind of live, let everyone be, everyone's got the opportunity to live their life, and let's just try and live as in harmony and sort of get on with each other and find a way. Would you think that's similar to what I'm thinking for you, Joël?
The thing is, I would just call it everyone sort of living in peace, and calling it living in freedom, living in whatever they're pleasing. So
yeah, and you've hit the nail on the head there. What's the difference between woke and freedom? I'm grappling with that. You know what I mean? Because I hear a lot of in Bitcoin spaces when I'm listening to it sometimes, and then people sort of throw this woke term around. I'm like, well, isn't that kind of what we're trying to achieve in a way? We're trying to achieve a place that is more equal for everybody. Bitcoin is for everybody. Slay your heroes and all that kind of stuff. Should we not just be having these conversations? Why are you still trying to polarize yourself and oppose yourself for other people's points of view? Why don't you just have this conversation, know that you've got a different opinion, but find the commonality between each other, and find a new language to move forward with under Bitcoin? That's where I'm at with things at the moment.
Yeah, I think Angelo said it in his episode It Does Best. He said all of the hardcore Bitcoiners or the Bitcoin maxis, can't remember which word he used, need to go suck a dick, or something along these lines. Because if you're trying to convince people of like one world view, or one thing of seeing an ecosystem, a space, a life, you're sort of not better off than the people you're actually trying to attack. And I think everyone gets that if we say it's the annoying woke, sort of the stuff that's being pushed down your throat by mainstream media to divide you, that's not something people want. But then again, I think if you speak to people probably in the LGBTQ community who've been there for a long time, that's not their idea as well. So it's a weird thing that they weaponize words, just like they weaponize Bitcoin as an association to, boiling the oceans. That's something these governments slash media outlets are very good at. So I think not falling for the bait is probably one of the hardest thing. And it's hard in every term. I mean, not just in the Bitcoin space. If you sit on the tube and I don't know, you're 20 kilos overweight and you see ads constantly dashing in your face that you need to take one medication and you lose 20 kilos, you get triggered as well, probably. So these are sort of the things I think where it's hard to opt out of that bait. But we
I think
really
people
should
need
be
to
doing
redirect their frustrations a little bit, not towards the people, but the people driving the narratives. And what I mean by that, and go with me with this a sec, because like if you think about consumerism as a whole, the consumers, I mean, not the consumers, the people that are trying to sell you this product want to sell you it, and they want to know what is the most popular opinion at the moment, where is the trend going, and they jump on that trend. They jump. What's happened to my voice? They jump on that to try to sell their product. And what I mean by that is when you mentioned the LGBTQ plus communities, when the whole rainbow flag thing, this was something that was born from the LGBTQ plus communities. And then what happened was, the likes of Nike and Bud Light and all that kind of stuff, they thought, we can sell our products with this. So, around Pride and all that kind of stuff, they put rainbow on it because they know these LGBTQ plus people, just like you and I and everyone else, they want to buy these products. And so they're trying to profit on the back of a movement. And when you've got organizations trying to sort of jump on the back of things like this, people start to sort of get uncomfortable with the narratives and where things are going, when all it is really is they're just trying to sell us shit and ride on the back of what is the new and progressive thing at the moment, and it just happens to be this. So everyone's anger is focused at these people and not at the organizations abusing the actual underlying message of what the LGBTQ plus communities were trying to achieve in the first place. And that's where I think when it comes back to, I'm trying to bring it back to Bitcoin, when I'm hearing in these spaces about wokeism and rainbow flags and that, it's not actually, it shouldn't actually be directed towards these people, because I think it kind of is, when it should be more towards the actual center of where these narratives are coming from.
The best example is, Ian, do you remember when you were a kid? Or certainly when I was you said it. When I was a kid, there used to be all of these Greenpeace advertisements on telly and radio and everywhere. They were everywhere for a long time. And back then, it really was that grassroots movement, things like, hey, if you think it's unfair that, I don't know, back in Switzerland, at one point you had to pay to go to like certain lakes because they had to get money in to clean the lakes for environmental reasons. And they used to run a big campaign for this, saying like, hey, it's unfair, before we could use it for free, because like nature should be free and now you got to pay for it. And like the evil fossil fuel corporations were responsible for it, something along those lines. And a lot of people signed up thinking, hey, that's really a movement. There used to be these organization meetups. And funny enough, Greenpeace used to be decentralized. And then it turned into this money-making machine where today we as Bitcoiners see it in real life. It's just a huge misinformation organization being bribed by a securities fraud company who are still in the midst of a settlement or a lawsuit with the SEC in America. And they completely lost their identity. And I think that's a very good example of showcasing the core ideas behind Greenpeace are probably still there in a lot of people who've been in that organization for a long time. But I would argue a lot of them have left the organization because it became a corporation. And I think that's the main difference between the org and the corp. You really have to think about it from this perspective. And you can bring it to LGBTQ, you can bring it to politics, you can bring it to money and Bitcoin and policy. All of what that's doing is these people are trying to abuse an uprising, I guess, or a movement that's currently on the up and trying to infiltrate it. And the sooner you realize this, the better. Should I now be angry at people working at Greenpeace and they make ends meet and they probably put money away to send their kids to college one day? Absolutely not, because they also need to keep the lights on and pay the bills. But sort of having that perspective, especially as a Bitcoiner, I think helps. And my experience these past couple of weeks of being offline, speaking to more Bitcoiners in real life, it sort of showcased that a lot of us actually think this way, and the stuff you read on Twitter or wherever is just a small fraction of the stuff that's really going on in real life. And yeah, so that would be sort of my message for today. Separate the org from the corp and really think about what the movements are about and what the core messages are, and ignore the fact that a lot around it is just marketing and trying to sell you a product or worst case, you are the product that's being sold. So yeah, that's sort of my end of the story.
Ray's message when we were recording with him stuck with me. You know, the power that we've got within us is immense, and if we just put our minds together as human beings, we can achieve so much together. Because you know, we're being gaslit, we're being given messages by central authorities who are trying to control the narrative, because they're going to try and control our mindset and our appetite for things. And people don't really, when they're being gaslit, they don't always recognize it. They feel uncomfortable. They feel their frustration and their anger, and they just don't know where it's coming from or why it's happening. So they're trying to direct that to some place where they can put that blame. And really, you know, at the end of the day, like I said right at the beginning, we've got more in common than I think we realize. So that's what I'm going to leave this episode with today, is that, you know, I think I'm going to try and remain as open-minded as possible and trying to listen to as many people as I can from many different camps. And I'm saying camps because these camps are formed because of the environment in the world that we live in. And I think that once we start to engage in open communication together without the interference or being sanctioned financially by the banks because we're saying and doing stuff that they don't agree with and shutting us down and discouraging us from being in communication with each other, I think these camps will start to sort of fall apart and just merge more freely together. That's a long way away, I think, but I think that's where we could go.
Without putting us up as hypocrites, shouldn't we then also listen to these government camps? I'm just thinking out loud, because we're doing a lot of the different things. But then, having said that,
we do though, don't we? We do all the time. We consume the narrative,
true.
But we're now seeing it through a Bitcoin lens.
True,
so
and I mean, Is
Go on.
there a corp and the org, if you think about government, because government is a corporate, I'm not calling government a corporation, but I think people know what I mean.
I understand the essence of what
there's
you're
not
saying.
a government movement behind government. I think if you ask anyone, no one wants to pay taxes. Only probably people benefiting from taxes want to pay taxes. So that's my thinking there for sort of, I don't know, pointing a finger at this, but you could make the case with banks, but then again, same thing. Like, I don't think there's a movement pro banking. If they were, there would be Bitcoiners. So yeah. But it's a good thought experiment to have at the end and think about what you can do.
The thing is, you hear all the time, you read like news articles, and like I listen to the news now, and I can just see right through it. I can just see like the underlying message. Because I understand that the money is broken, and you hear politicians saying they're going to do this, they're going to do that, they're going to inject money here and there, and I just know how that money's going to be shuffled around, and you know, you put it somewhere else, and someone else is going to pay it back elsewhere. You know, it's just going to be sort of like shuffled around all the time. But I think you make a good point. Yeah,
it really is this. At the end of the day, sort of all roads inevitably lead to Bitcoin. And it's up to you if you want to be on that road, if you want to drive a different road. I guess if you want to be stuck and be part of the old problem, because arguably, whether you're a Bitcoiner or not, you're looking at the world and you have to admit it is fucked up, and there has to be a reason behind it, why it gotten to that point where we've been stuck in now for what it feels like years, and at the end of the day, either you find a solution or you're sort of part of the problem. I guess that's how you can look at these things.
What do you guys think? Comment below, or wherever you're listening to us, just let us know. Don't forget to subscribe and listening to what we got to say. We got who we got coming up? Who's our next guest scheduled in?
We already recorded it. I'm in the midst of the edit. We've got Q coming on.
Oh, Q! Yeah, that was a great
a fun
one.
episode.
Yeah,
And
I
we've
love
got
Q. He's a good
Jason
guy.
Mayer on. We've got Julian from Relay on. So we've got a few cool people on.
Yeah, so why not give us another go and subscribe, and we'll see you next time down the Bitcoin rabbit hole. Take care, guys.
See you then.